Good afternoon, welcome. It's wonderful to see this amazing turnout. I'm so excited for this event. It's been a long time coming. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ajay Rao. I'm the Vice Dean, Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs at the University of Toronto Mississauga. And I'm so pleased to welcome you today for this special lecture on Anekāntavāda and Jain identity, which is presented in collaboration with the Bhagwan 1008 Adinatha Swamy Jain Temple. This is a really exciting milestone for us in our partnership with the temple. We envision this as the first of many events. We hope that this whets your appetite for much more collaboration between the University of Toronto and the Jain Temple. And the event today and all the other events are connected to the Gyan and Kanchan Jain Chair in Jain Studies. So these are beautiful events that we are going to be hosting, and this is an incredible achievement to have created this chair. And really, we owe gratitude, all of us, to the Gyan and Kanchan Jain family. It was made possible by a generous investment from the Jain family, and it's really remarkable. Their dedication to enriching this field will have a lasting impact on the university, on our community, and on future generations. So if you're not familiar with this term, a chair is the most prestigious academic appointment at the university. This is a person who is a senior scholar, a leader in the field, and chair holders are experts. They have the vision and drive to advance knowledge, impact practice, and shape the future of the disciplines. This particular creation is especially impactful because it positions the University of Toronto Mississauga to be a leader in the field and really ensures that we have academic excellence and leadership at U of T. It's the first chair in the humanities at the University of Toronto Mississauga. I'm so proud that the first chair is a Jain chair. Just think about that. We believe it will open minds to new perspectives, broaden our understanding of the world and our place in it. Building on the university's unique academic strengths, the chair in Jain Studies will have the resources and support to develop a world-class program. We believe the best in the world program in Jain Studies that deepens our understanding and appreciation of Jainism. The chair holder, what will the chair holder do? The chair holder will teach courses, undergraduate courses, train and mentor graduate students, lead new research on Jain manuscripts, and there'll be a range of activities in collaboration with the community. Collaborating with the local and global Jain community is the center of our initiative. So we really hope that events like today encourage dialogue and promote thoughtful exchange. We want to build bridges between academia and the Jain community, and we want to preserve and share knowledge in ways that reflect the shared lived experiences and traditions and values of Jainism. And in addition to the fact that we've established the chair, we have this wonderful event. Another thing that makes this super auspicious is the fact that we have our Jain chair, who, as I've told some of you, has already become a friend of mine. I'm learning about Jainism. We sit and read Jain texts all the time, so this has been a personal journey for me that's very enriching. And so we're so honored to have, after a very extensive international search, to have Professor Christine Chojnacki be named the inaugural Jain Chair. Before joining us, Christine was a professor of Indian Studies at the University of Lyon in France. Her research focuses on unexplored medieval Jaina sources in Sanskrit and Prakrit. And she is a very renowned scholar. She's received notable recognition for her work, including the Palmes Académiques, a prestigious award honoring her contributions to teaching and culture. And I know Christine, I know that she is also very invested in fostering an academic environment where scholarly research and community engagement will be developed together in partnership. So before today's lecture, I'd like us to invite Professor Chojnacki to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Ajay, for this introduction. So I am almost without words after it. So I am delighted to be here today at my first event as the inaugural Gyan and Kanchan Jain Chair in Jain Studies. I am grateful and honored to hold this position and to be part of the university dedicated to this field. And I am very grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with faculty, students, and community members to build a vibrant and impactful Jain Studies program. As a beginning of this, since it is very auspicious, I would call Hans Jain to come here and to give him a book that is a result of a workshop on Jain Studies. And so for him and his family, the gift of knowledge, so I think it is very auspicious, since also Gyan means knowledge. As a teacher, I plan to teach courses that explore the richness of Jainism, delving into its key principles like ahiṃsā, that you all know, like also the topic of today's lectures, Anekāntavāda. And as a researcher, my research is focused on preserving, disseminating, and studying Jain manuscripts, which are a very rich part of Indian culture and where the Jains have played a very important role. A key part of my work will involve digitizing invaluable texts, safeguarding them for future generations, while opening new avenues for research and discovery. I am also eager to work closely with students and community members to help them develop the language skills needed to explore these treasures of Jain literatures, that means Sanskrit and Prakrit, and to gain deeper insights into the religious history of Jainism. In this spirit, I am pleased to share that I will begin offering free online Jain Prakrit lessons for the community in the near future. And I look forward to organizing more events like today's that bring together scholars and the community to enhance our understanding of Jainism and its profound impact. With this in mind, it is my pleasure to introduce today's lecturer, Professor Anil Mundra, who will speak about Anekāntavāda, the Jain philosophy of non-one-sidedness. Anil is an assistant professor and the holder of the Bhagwan Vimalnath Endowed Chair in Jain Studies and South Asian Religions at the University of California, Santa Barbara. His research focuses on how South Asian philosophers think about and address religious diversity, particularly in Sanskrit texts related to the theory of Anekāntavāda. We are fortunate to have him with us today. We look forward to his engaging and thought-provoking lecture. Please join me in welcoming Professor Anil Mundra.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. It is such, this is great to see you all. This is a great turnout. And it is such an honor and a pleasure for me to be here, to be in Toronto, to be in the great country of Canada, to be involved with the University of Toronto, to be at this event with this august institution, really premier institution, the University of Toronto. To be at the temple here in Brampton. This is not my first time here, and I love being here every time. It's such an amazing, beautiful campus you have here. I I in fact show pictures of it to my students when I'm teaching about Jainism, and particularly the Manastamba in front, which is, to my knowledge, it's the only Manastamba at a Jain temple in North America. I don't, if anyone knows any. So very impressive, and so I show it to my students as an example, and this is such a beautiful community. So I love coming here, and I'll come back again anytime you want me to. But thank you so much for doing this, and of course, I just have to say, I can never say enough how profoundly grateful and appreciative I am to the community of Jain donors who have been making these academic positions possible, really filling a gap in the academic study of religion and of South Asian Indian religions that, where Jainism has been very, very largely sort of ignored by academics for a long time, and now finally it's getting the attention that it deserves thanks to these endowments. Of course, currently, though, as Christine said, I am the recipient of an endowment in the University of California. I had a postdoc that was endowed by the Jain community in New Jersey before this. So my work would not be possible without you all, without the community. And I just can't say enough how grateful I am and how grateful we all are for this, and particularly doubly so at this moment in which public funding of higher education in the U.S. is being threatened, and so community funding is as important, is more important now than ever. So I just thank you all so much, and I want to give you a round of applause, the community, for what you've been doing. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to, as my research focuses on Anekāntavāda, and so that's what I'm going to talk to you all about now, and Christine has already given us a gloss on Anekāntavāda, the philosophy of non-one-sidedness, and it's something that I think, in the community is something very much in circulation as an important concept, this idea that's often positioned as sort of one of the three pillars of Jainism. And I actually want to start with, and my research focuses on classical, on texts on Anekāntavāda in Sanskrit, largely from sort of the first millennium of the Common Era, late first millennium. I especially focus on the very important Muni named, he was an Acharya named Haribhadrasuri, and this is an artist's rendition, depiction of him in the middle there. And so I'll be talking about him some more. But I actually want to start much more recently with Mahatma Gandhi, who is, of course, one of the most famous and influential and important Indians, actually human beings, right, of all in all modern history, or even in all history. And as we know, as I'm sure probably most of you know, he was very deeply influenced by Jainism. But he also, I think that actually Gandhiji's thought also very much influenced thought about topics like ahiṃsā and Anekāntavāda. And so here's a statement of, we of course know that ahiṃsā was central to his satyagraha, his civil resistance, his clinging to truth, right, his nonviolent political action. And Anekāntavāda was also very important to him. And so here's a statement of Gandhi talking about what Anekāntavāda meant to him. He says, "The world is changing every moment and is therefore unreal. It has no permanent existence. But though it is constantly changing, it has something about it. Although it is constantly changing, it has something about it which persists and is therefore, to that extent, real. I have therefore no objection to calling it both real and unreal, and thus being called an Anekāntavādi or Syadvādi. Syadvāda being basically another word for Anekāntavāda, or sometimes one sort of part of Anekāntavāda. But my Syadvāda is not the Syadvāda of the learned. It is peculiarly my own. I cannot engage in a debate with them. It has been my experience. Oh, sorry, I should ignore that brackets there. It has been my experience that I am always true from my point of view, and I am often wrong from the point of view of my honest critics. I know that we are both right from our respective points of view. Okay, so I am not going to claim to be learned, but I will engage in a little bit of a debate with Gandhi here. I think, he says his Syadvada is not the Syadvada of the learned. Actually, I think his Syadvada is in some ways, his Anekāntavāda is in some ways very close to the Anekāntavāda of the learned, of the tradition, of the scholastic tradition. And so I'm going to kind of compare, I'm going to explain some of the features of the classical tradition of Anekāntavāda and compare it to what Gandhi says. I think he's close in some ways and really reflects Anekāntavāda in some ways, although I think we have to get really clear about what's going on and the ways in which maybe we don't want to misunderstand him, right? Because, of course, samyak jnana, samyak darshana, right knowledge, right view are crucial to the Jain path, right? And we have to properly understand things in order to, we don't want to misunderstand things. And there's a temptation when you look at these kinds of statements that I'm always true from my point of view and often wrong from the point of view of my honest critics. I know that we're both right from our respective points of view. There's a temptation to think that Anekāntavāda means something like, well, everybody's right. Everybody's right, nobody's wrong. I think one thing, somebody else thinks something else, they think I'm wrong, but actually, nobody's really wrong, everybody's right. This is what philosophers call relativism. And I do hear sometimes people interpreting Anekāntavāda in this way. But I think that's a problem, right? Because if you think that, then you can't make any judgments about anything. You can't say that anything is right and wrong. You can't say that killing is wrong. You can't say that, being nonviolent is right? So we don't want to go that far with it. So what is going on here? And actually part of the key, I'm going to argue, is this first part. That this idea about the world changing every moment, but although it's constantly changing, has something about it which persists. Now, what's the relationship between this? This is what's not, I think, talked about as much in contemporary discussion of Anekāntavāda, this aspect. What does this have to do with this part, right? What does the world changing and persisting have to do with being, right, everyone right from their own point of view? So this is what I'm going to sort of try to explain today. So I'll come back to this first part, but let's think about this second part first. How can we understand this in a way where it's not just like sort of this relativistic, oh, everybody's right, nobody's wrong, and then you can't say anything at all? Well, here's a classical statement of something to this effect. So this is the great Acharya Siddhasena. Maybe his sort of surname was Divakara. And he is credited with a work called the Sanmati Tarka Prakarana, a very important work on one of the foundational works on Anekāntavāda or Nayavada, the doctrine of Naya's perspectives. And this Siddhasena Divakara, here's a statue of him that's in Chittor, Rajasthan, in a temple there. And Siddhasena says it this way, okay? He says, each viewpoint is truly assertable in its own domain, but is wrong when it intrudes upon another. A person who sees this non-one-sidedness of reality does not distinguish them as simply true or false. Niya vaya nijya satcha savanaya paraviyalane moha te unana dittha sammao vibhayai satcheva aliyava. That's the Prakrit, that's the original Prakrit, okay? So, and then he goes on and he says, all viewpoints, nayas, without exception, are false views as bound to their own positions. However, as mutually dependent, they become properly truthful. Tamha, therefore, savevi naya michhaditi, mithyadrishti, right? Michhaditi sapakha paribadha. Anena anona nisya una havanti sammatta sabhava. So, what is Siddhasena saying here? He's not saying that every viewpoint is true, period, and that that no one is wrong, that it's not possible to say wrong things, and that anything you say, anything goes, right? Anything you say is going to be true. What he's saying is, you have to understand there are respects in which any statement might be true in its own domain, but you have to understand the respect in which some statement is true. You have to understand that any statement captures some aspect, some limited aspect of reality, but you can't push it too far. You can't take some limited, one-sided statement and think that it's going to capture all of reality. So it's only when you take these various one-sided statements that are sort of partial views, right? When you take them and you put them together, when you understand the ways in which they are mutually dependent upon each other, the ways in which they fit together, that's when you really get a view of the truth, okay? So this is not some kind of anything goes, any statement is true. This is actually about the complexity, the richness of reality and the way you come to understand that richness. So the way I'd put it then is that what Anekāntavāda is saying, and I like to translate it as the theory of non-one-sidedness, right? There's many ways that people might translate Anekāntavāda, but I think it most literally means, right, non, eka, one-sided, sidedness, or the view of what's non-one-sided. Anta is a side or an aspect of things. So this theory of non-one-sidedness. So basically, so there are many aspects, there are many ways to think about this theory, but basically the idea is that anything is complex, is internally complex and has many sides, right? And in particular, the way Siddhasena, the guy that we were just looking at, right, the way he unfolds this in that treatise that we were just looking at is according to these viewpoints, these nayas. And he analyzes all of these different sort of sides or aspects of things. He analyzes the complexity of reality in terms of two basic broad categories. And these nayas, these two categories or viewpoints, are these two basic ones. Substance. Anything can be viewed as both substance, that's called the dravya naya or the vaktiya naya. And so substance, that is some persisting, substantial thing, and its qualities, its modifications, and that's the paryaya naya, the pajayatina naya in Prakrit. Anything is both some stuff, some solid stuff that it is, but also its qualities, the ways in which it has some various features, and modifications. These qualities are changing, right? And what that means is that anything is both permanent and impermanent, both persisting and changing, persisting in its substance and changing in its qualities and its modifications. And this brings us back to Gandhi, right? Because this brings us back to the first part of his statement here. The world is changing at every moment, and though it is constantly changing, it has something about it which persists. So now I think you start to see the relationship between this and this, right? This idea of the world as changing and the world, and this idea about views, having different views that are somehow true in their own respects, right? Depends how you look at something. If you can look at something and see that it is permanent, persisting, you can also look at something and see that it is changing. These are two different views. But if you really want to understand the thing, you have to see it in both ways at the same time. And so actually I would debate with Gandhi here when he says, because it's changing every moment, the world is unreal. But it is only real to the extent to which it persists. I think that is actually a particularly, as we'll see, I'll come back to this, I think that's a particularly sort of non-Jain, actually a kind of a certain kind of Hindu view of things, where it's only something's permanence that makes it real. And I think what Anekāntavāda wants to say is that actually the reality is in both of these together. Like Siddhasena said, right? You can only really get at the truth by looking at how these different nayas are fitting together, how they are mutually dependent. So I don't think actually Anekāntavāda and Anekāntavādis classically want to privilege the permanence over the change. I think they want to say both are real. And so I think this is one way in which actually Gandhi is departing from Jain tradition. I'll come back to that kind of thing in a few minutes. Okay. So to put it briefly, this is put most briefly in Umaswati or Umaswami's Tattvartha Sutra or Tattvartha Adhigama Sutra, right? So this is, any of you that know Jain literature will probably have heard of this text, the sort of first real sort of handbook of Jain doctrine in Sanskrit. And it's this list of sutras, just very short, statements of the official, what official Jain doctrine. And here is in the 5th chapter on Dravya, depends on if you're using the Shvetambara, the Dingambara edition, recension of the text, verse 20, Sutra 29 or 30. Umaswati says, any entity is endowed with origination, destruction, and persistence. Utpada vyaya dravya yuktam sat. So any entity, any real thing that we can think of, that we can look at, insofar as something is real, it is coming into being, persisting, and passing away. That this persistence is a real feature of anything. Oops. So persistence is a real feature of anything, but it's not the only real feature of anything. It is part of anything's reality that it's also coming into being and passing away, that is changing. So that's Umaswati, that's a classic statement of this. I'm going to actually skip this slide in the interest of time. Okay, so what is this? So this is another artist's depiction of Haribhadra, and I now want to look at what Haribhadra makes of this, because I know this has all been like a little bit abstract so far, and Haribhadra helps to sort of bring it home. The stories of him are very vivid, This is this important episode in which Haribhadra is. The story goes that he was born. He was not born a Jain. He was born a Brahmin, and he was a very learned Brahmin, and he was so learned, so puffed up with knowledge that he had to wear a golden belt to contain his overflowing wisdom, his overflowing knowledge, or else it would have leaked out, I suppose. But he said, if anyone can say anything that I don't understand, I will immediately humble myself before them and make myself their disciple. So he's walking down the street one day, and he overhears this sadhvi, this Jain nun, reciting some verse in Prakrit, and he could not understand. He didn't know what she was saying, and so he's listening. What is that? And so when she's finished, he goes and he says, "Please teach me. I didn't understand I thought I knew everything, and I didn't understand what you were saying. Please teach me." And so she starts to teach him, and she brings him to her guru, her preceptor, and he takes Diksha as a Jain. And then there's another story about getting chased by an elephant that I won't get into. That'll take us too far afield. But there's a lot of good stories about being chased by elephants and the Jain Dharma protecting you, right? Here's how Haribhadra thinks about this. So any real thing, a vastu, if anything is real, it is composed of both substance, dravya, and quality, guna, and mode, pariyaya. So we've already seen this. This is straight out of Siddhasena, right? And what Haribhadra says, he says, Jains do not regard substance and quality, dravya and pariyaya, or dravya and guna pariyaya, as being entirely different, as the Vaisheshikas do, okay? Vaisheshikas are another group of philosophers. They're basically some sort of Hindu philosophers who think that substance and quality are totally different. This sounds a little bit like what Gandhi was saying, Substance is really, is sort of like the main thing. That is what something is in its sort of continuation, its persistence. That's the main thing. And the qualities that things have, the changing qualities are something else, and those are kind of extraneous. Those are not really real. Haribhadra is saying, Jains don't think like that. Jains do not regard substance and quality as being entirely different as the Vaisheshikas do. We say rather they are different in some way. That is, of course, they are different. Substance and quality are different. But substance is not partless. It rather has a single cum multiple nature. That is, its nature is both single and multiple. It's single insofar as it's a single substance. Any vastu is a single dravya, a single substance that's continuing, but it has multiple qualities and modes, multiple gunas and paryayas. And this, of course, is Anekāntavāda, being single and multiple, being non-one-sided, right? Okay, so this is still very abstract, so now I promise I'm going to make it a little more concrete. Because these issues, these are abstract metaphysical issues, but they really hit, the rubber hits the road when we're talking about what kind of substance are we talking about here? What kind of things? The most important thing in Jainism is your soul, right? Is the substance that is your soul. And it's not just in Jainism. This is true basically throughout Indian religions, throughout South Asian religions. The question is of who are you really? What are you really? This is the question of personal identity. Okay? That's what philosophers call this personal identity. Who are you really? What is the nature of the self? So it is very common for Hindus, various kinds of Hindus, to say that what's the nature of the self? Well, the self is essentially conscious. That is the nature. The self is consciousness, or the self is essentially conscious. Various kinds of Hindus who think about the self in different kinds of ways, different Hindu philosophers agree about this. And as we'll see, Jains also kind of, Jains do agree about this, that this, is essential quality of the self. It is essential for the self to be conscious. On the other hand, Buddhists, with whom Jains and Hindus were always very much in conversation, say, this is a fool's errand. There is no self to be identified in this way. Don't go looking for the essence of the self. You won't find it. You can't say that the self is essentially conscious because you're not going to find any essence that the self actually is. So this is sort of this diametrically, these two polarized views, and we can think of, we can think of so many polarized views in today's world, right, where people are so far apart and seem to have nothing in common and totally disagree on something. And here's a pre-modern example of that, an ancient example. Seem to be worlds apart. And yet there is a common presupposition in both of these views, that the self is essentially conscious and that there really is no self to be identified. And the common presupposition is that any true self has some permanency. That for anything to count as a self, or the essence of the self, it has to be somehow persisting, somehow permanent. And that is the presupposition, that's the what we saw, I think, in Gandhi, right? This idea that for that anything, that anything which persists is to that extent real. It's real to the extent that it persists, including like the self, And but that seems to be a common assumption to both the Hindus and the Jains, because the Hindus say, well, that is the self, you have this consciousness that persists. You can see, you go to sleep, and you wake up the next morning and you remember what happened, and you even remember maybe some of your dreams. So there's this continual consciousness, right? And maybe you're even reborn after you die, and you have your consciousness is still there. Maybe you even remember your past lives, yeah? So whereas the Buddhists say, even that consciousness that you think is continuous is actually constantly changing. It's constantly passing in and out of existence, and therefore that's not yourself. Because anything that is constantly changing can't be yourself, okay? So they both assume that any true self has some permanency. And where the Buddhists and the Hindus basically differ is that they disagree that you can find something that has that kind of permanency. So how do Jains intervene in this issue? They think that they're both kind of right. So it's like Gandhi was saying, right? I think I'm right from my point of view. Someone else thinks I'm wrong. This is the kind of conversation that's happening here. And Jains will say, you're both kind of right. But it's not that, okay, you're both right, and then that's all there is to say about it, because clearly we can't leave it there. We have to get clearer about what's going on here. How are they both right? So here's how Haribhadra puts it. It's only for one who is an Anekāntavāda about things, that is, things whose essences are beset by contrary properties. That is, things are essentially have these different properties like constancy and change, permanence and impermanence. It's only if you see things in this way, if you're an Anekāntavādi, if you see things as non-one-sided in this way, that there is establishment of all everyday transactions. That is to say, you can only make sense of just everyday activity by thinking about things in this non-one-sided way. Why? Because liberation makes sense insofar as suffering, disgust, and the knowledge and realization of the path and so on have a single locus in some way. Liberation only makes sense if there is some continuing single thing that is living and experiencing suffering and then experiencing disgust with that suffering existence and then developing the knowledge and the realization that will take that thing, to that soul, that being, that person, to liberation beyond the suffering and disgust. So Hans, I promised you yesterday that we were gonna talk about, suffering and discuss with suffering and liberation, and here we finally got to it. Okay, so that's but why does that mean that you have to view things as both? Why is this true? Why does this this requirement of being, a single continuing thing, why does that require Anekāntavāda? Why does that require contrary properties? He says, Haribhadra goes on to say, it's only for a permanent cum impermanent individual, that is, an individual that is both permanent and impermanent, that is both persisting and changing. It's only for such an individual that the enjoyment of the results of action done by oneself and the relation between grasper and grasped and so on makes sense. It's due to its being in some way persisting that these phenomena of the enjoyment of results and the grasping relation occur as they do, which is established by experience. So what is he talking about here? In fact, he's not just talking about liberation, about the moksha marga. He's talking about any everyday action, like he said before, everyday transactions, just the everyday things that we do, right? The enjoyment of the results of action done by yourself, okay? I'm doing an action, I'm speaking, and I am hoping to enjoy the result of that, being that people learn something. If I cannot, if I finish this lecture, and then afterwards someone comes up to me and says, thank you, I enjoyed that, or I didn't like your lecture. I didn't learn anything. Either way, if I say, well, that wasn't me that was speaking, you'd be like, what? You have to assume that what I'm doing bears some relationship to the results of that in the future. And that means that I have to be permanent, I have to be persisting, right? It has to be the same me that is giving the lecture and, that's having the results of this lecture. But also impermanent. Why? Because I'm not always giving this lecture. I'm going to give this lecture and then it's going to be finished and I'm going to walk off this stage and we're all going to enjoy a nice lunch, I hope. And, there is always going to be change happening. And if I am doing an action and then hoping to have the results of that action, there is change between those two states. So there has to be some continuity and some change between them, right? Relationship between grasper and grasp, same thing. What is he talking about? It sounds like sort of grasping a glass of water, right, that I'm going to take a sip of. If I want there to be a relationship between grasper and grasp, I have to be able to understand that there's some me that is like continuing to take a sip of this water, and that I go from being thirsty to not being thirsty anymore, right? So there's some continuation and there's some change. And actually, he's talking about not just grasping things with my hand, but grasping things also with my mind. That's actually primarily what he's talking about. Understanding, coming to know things. So that's why he says before, developing knowledge and realization of the path, having a single locus. It's got to be me that is traveling this path, traveling this everyday path, doing various things, but also traveling this longer path towards liberation, and ultimately this path over many lifetimes, right? If it's not the same me that's being reborn and developing towards liberation, then what am I doing? What's the point of it all? So that's basically the Jain view. So this is, we're talking about identity, who am I, you know? And we're talking about two kinds of identity, a metaphysical identity, that is identity of anything just being what it is, right? And in particular, the personal identity, a person being what they are. So that's the continuing identity of a person. That is people who have projects, values, norms, and goals. You have certain things that you want to achieve, and you have to be able to understand that you are continuing enough to achieve those things, but that there's enough change so that there is actually some development of what you're trying to achieve, right? That it's something new that's happening. And this actually relates to the idea, as my title says, of Jain identity. What is it to be a Jain? Arguably, to be a Jain is to belong to a group of people that have this project of the Jain Moksha Marga, of traveling this path towards liberation, right? Developing from a state of being unliberated, being in samsara, of having suffering, becoming disgusted with it, being ignorant, to a state of knowledge, bliss, consciousness. Okay? So that's how these two things fit together. That's why Anekāntavāda is required I'm arguing, is required to understand Jain identity, and actually to understand the identities of any things at all, so these Jain philosophers say. Because if you don't understand how, for example, things are both constant, continuing, and changing, you can't make sense of any of this. That's basically that's all I have to say today. So I'm going to leave it there. I look forward to discussing more. I don't know if we're going to have a group discussion or we'll do some Q&A. Okay, so thank you very much, and I'm happy to take some questions now.
I think there's a second microphone, right? Yeah. Okay, great. So anybody can raise their hand if they have a question? Yes, over here.
Hello, Professor.
Hi, thank you.
Very interesting discussions and viewpoints presented, and thank you for that. So I'm going to try to summarize what I understood, and please correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
So what I heard is that in life there's multiplicity of views, left and right, or exist, does not exist.
Yeah.
There's also past, present, and future, right? In English literature, which you have seen, you cannot live in the past, you cannot live in the future, you have to deal with now, and hang on 1 second. When you look at everything exists in its own individual moment or one perspective views. But I think you also said that when you try to put an assembly of views together, then it doesn't exist, which is slightly confusing. And then if I take the past, present, and future, nothing is permanent and temporary. I mean, I can get it. Life goes on. Life is here.
Yes.
The sun is here. The sun goes away.
Yeah.
There's a multiplicity of things and things coming into being and passing away.
Yeah.
So if I take this in an existential way of view, then you can say, I am Jain and I'm also not Jain.
Yeah.
Which really gets into compounding my head with confusion and headache of what this. How can I exist but not exist?
Right.
And how does I'm just hoping you can give me some
Yeah.
clarity of my misunderstanding.
Yeah,
if there
great.
is any.
That's great. So thank you. You went straight to the heart of the issue, and thank you for helping me clarify that. So. So these are examples, like something exists and not exists. These are also examples of these opposites, these various sides that Anekāntavādis want to say. Everything has these. But you have to understand the respect in which each of these are true. The respect in which something exists and the respect in which it doesn't exist. So, yeah, okay, clearly everything, all of us are existing right here, right now, and all of us are, we experience that we're right here, right now. Then, as you said, if you look at sort of, past and future then, and you look at these other, these past and future, they don't exist right now. Past and future, we don't exist in the past and future right now from the perspective of the present. But we will exist in the future, and we have existed in the past. So from the perspective, in the respect of our future self, I am existent. From the perspective of my past self, I am existent. And we have to understand it that way, and that's the point about understanding. We have to understand ourselves as persisting, because if you divide everything up and if you say it's only a series of moments, each existing in its present but no past and future, that's basically like this Buddhist view that's saying, there's some Buddhist views that say everything is momentary and, anything that's beyond that is non-existent. And that's kind of like what Gandhi seemed to be saying, But But then you can't make sense. Haribhadra and these other Anekāntavādis are saying you can't make sense of any action that has results in the future. If you think that your future self that is getting the results of your action is not the self that is doing the action now, why would you do anything? If you invest in a stock today, hoping it's going to give you some return next year, then you get the return next year, but why would you care? Why would yourself next year care about getting the return if it wasn't the one who made the investment? Why would you care to make the investment now if it's not going to be you getting the return? Okay? Please, go take the mic.
Quantum mechanics. Everything exists and doesn't exist at the same time. The example you gave was time.
Yeah.
Does not exist in the past, will exist in the future, but that's a time linear coefficient which goes across it.
Yeah.
But what the second half of your example was quantum mechanics. Everything can exist and not exist at the same time, and everything exists. So I'm trying to think is Jainism more like quantum mechanics of single views? I
would say quantum mechanics is more like Jainism. I think quantum mechanics definitely exemplifies this Anekāntavāda, this co-presence of contraries, right? Wave-particle duality, Something is both a wave and a particle. These are opposite characterizations, but they're both right. But the thing is, you got to be clear about, both in quantum mechanics and in Jainism, you have to understand the sense in which each of these are true. It's not that something is a wave in all ways and is also a particle in all ways. That wouldn't make any sense. It's just contradictory. But it's not contradictory if you understand the sense in which it's a wave. Things are waves because when you do quantum mechanical experiments, waves interfere with each other, and you see diffraction patterns, and you see other kinds of wave interference. Things are also particles because when you do certain kinds of quantum mechanical experiments, you see that there are single photons and other particles that are interacting with other particles. So you have to understand the sense in which each of these opposite things are true. And I think this is, that's true. That's the case in quantum mechanics and in Jainism.
Hi, Professor. Thank you. I just had a question in regards to personal identity.
Yeah.
And I was curious what you think about one's personal identity persisting if your thoughts constantly change.
Yeah.
And that's similar to like the ship of Theseus, where you kind of keep replacing parts of it.
Yes.
Is it still the ship? And in regards to yourself, you constantly change your thoughts, your opinions about yourself, and what you really think about the world.
Right.
So is that still yourself, and is your identity persisting, or is it kind of changing?
Yeah, exactly. So this is right the heart of the matter, right? The image, for those of you that don't know, the image of the ship of Theseus is an ancient Greek parable where there's a ship on the sea, right? And let's say it pops a leak, right? So you have to go and put a board back. You have to replace the leaky board with a new board. And then there's another leak, and you have to place another board, with a new board. And you keep doing that till the whole hull of the ship has been replaced. And then, when you replace each of those boards, it seems like it's the same ship. It's just the same ship with a new board, right? But you replace all the boards and the whole hull is replaced. Is that still the same ship? Well, maybe you want to say, yeah. But then, the mast gets messed up, or, the sail gets ripped up. You got to replace the sail, bring it into harbor, Eventually, if you wait long enough, the whole ship is going to be replaced. So that is to say, none of the parts in the ship as it is now are the original parts. It's all new parts in the ship. Is it still the same ship or not? This is a paradox. The ancient Greeks considered this a paradox. And I think, these other philosophers that, sort of think that you have to have total permanence for something to be the same, you can't make sense of this situation. Or other philosophers that think that, as soon as you change one little thing, that everything is constantly changing and therefore nothing is remaining the same. Can't make sense of the situation. It's only Jain philosophers, Anekāntavādis, who can say, well, okay, it is the same ship in the sense that, there was some continuity. There's some continuity of the ship. There is, it had the same name, we named it something in the beginning, we're still calling it the same thing now. We are using it for the same things. Maybe it had the same crew that was using it. Maybe the same people were sailing on it the whole time. How could it be a totally new ship if it was the same people that were sailing on it the whole time and maybe never even got off, right? And that's actually the image of the ship, is that it's totally rebuilt while you're in it. And at the same time, and yet, it's a totally new ship in that all of its parts have changed. All of its materials have changed. It is completely different in its materials. Both are true. And you have to see, and this makes total sense. And when you break it down like that, and you see the sense in which both of these are true, there's nothing puzzling about it. There's nothing confusing about it. So then it's the same thing with a person, right? We know that actually, I think it's something like every 7 years or something, all of your cells in your body will be new, right? Will be regenerated and replaced. And this is constantly happening at every moment, right? Your hair is growing, and then some of your other cells are dying and being regenerated. This is how living bodies work. And after some amount of time, it's all of your cells are going to be replaced. Does that mean that you are not the same person that you were 7, 8 years ago? I don't think so. I don't think it makes sense to say that, because we always talk about, when I was a kid, when I was young, when I was, 7 years old, which was many more than 7 years ago, right? So, I mean, so you have to be able to say that, and then this is true at a mental level, and so you have to be able to say both, and you have to be able to understand the sense in which those are both true. Does that make sense? By the way, there's a great film, an Indian film called Ship of Theseus, that relies on this idea, and it's sort of in 3 mini-stories, and one of the mini-stories is about a Jain monk who is becoming sick, and he's having to deal with parts of his body breaking down, and does he want to become an organ donor? So that actually the whole movie is about these 3 different people who are going to not be organ donors. They're going to be recipients of organ donation, and what does that mean for their lives and their identities? I highly recommend the film. Yeah. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I think my question so thank you very much for the lecture. I think my question relates probably to the page that would have come after where you were in the screens. I was curious about the relationship between the identity of the individual and that of Jainism. And I'm wondering if the simplified analogy would be that we're all in the same ocean as Jains, we're in different ships. Mm-hmm. In a similar journey, because there's a lot of individualism in the Jain approach, if you will, but yet you referred to us being on a common journey. So I was wondering if you could elaborate upon that last page. Yeah.
This is another good application of Anekāntavāda, because yes, there is the view that in Jainism, right, that we all have our individual souls, and this is different from some Hindu views, right, for example, where sort of our Atman, each of our individual selves, our Atman is actually part of one universal Brahman, universal soul. And there seem to be ways, and when you look at, like some of the statements in the Upanishads and stuff and the arguments for this, there seem to be ways in which, yeah, we seem to be sharing in a common experience, right? We all have this consciousness. We all have this consciousness, and that allows us to have a shared experience, to be sort of traveling in the same ship, as you say. And of course, there's this famous Jain slogan that comes from the Tattvartha Sutra also, Parasparopagraho Jivanam. All souls are mutually intertwined, imbricated, are dependent upon each other. So there's clearly some way in which we are sharing some experience, but also have our own individual experiences. And it has to be the case that we are individuals, because if not, this is a classic standard Jain argument for Jain philosophers say, if we were not individual souls, if we were all part of the same soul, then when any one person was liberated, everybody else would be liberated at the same time. Or vice versa, no one would ever get liberated. And that can't be the case, as when you see examples of people that are having different experience, different trajectories. So we are both same and different. And so one way that Jain metaphysics makes sense of this is to say, we are all different individuals, but we have some essential identity. That is, all of our souls have the same essential qualities. And the qualities are, consciousness. We all have every soul is basically conscious and in exactly the same way. And joyful, has basic capacity for joy, sukha, saukya, ananda, and virya, some energy, some capacity. Every soul has these capacities or these qualities, but it's not the same, it's not actuated in the same way for each soul. So there's technical philosophical language I could use to talk about this. We are each numerically different, although we are qualitatively identical, but that probably would just confuse things more than it would help. So, is that helpful? Yes, thank you. Okay. Enough? Okay.
I think that's good. So thank you so much. Anil, I'm so happy he got to share a little bit about his research. Clearly, Jain philosophy is both very relevant today and has such a deep history. So thank you, Anil. And before we move on to this, we're so grateful to the family, the Gyan and Kanchan Jain family for everything. Also to the temple for caringly preparing this lunch, and for the family for generously providing the lunch. I'd like to invite Hans Jain to say just a few words.
Thanks, Ajay. I just wanted to say a few words. I wanted to thank everyone for coming. I wanted to thank the temple, the staff, especially UTM. They've been incredible. The relationship between University of Toronto Mississauga, Ajay, has been something of trust for the family, and it's been, it's great to see, the Jain community evolving, and allowing the next generation and other people to actually experience it at the university level. And it's something that, our community is small, and it's great to see that it's now accessible. And so I want to thank the university for all their support, and also Andrew and Macarena. Thank you very much, and thank you for UTM putting on this incredible presentation and helping us put it together. Also, I wanted to thank Christine, Professor Christine Chodzinski. She's an incredible lady. Thank you for the book. This is now the 4th book that she has given me. I think it'll take a lifetime for me to actually read the incredible work she's done. And this gesture of opening it up to the community, the language. Thank you very, very much. It's something that I'm going to enjoy and learn, Prakrit, and I think, you know, other people here should jump on it. And finally, you know, I want to thank Professor Anil Mudra for an incredible presentation. We got to spend time last evening, and we went and had vegetarian Chinese food, and we got to break bread, and it was an honor. Incredible story, and you know, he's a very bright guy. So we'd love to have him here at some point. Thank you very, very much. And you know, great, Panditji was able to, he stayed here at the temple. So as we are visiting professors and academics, we have a great, you know, facility here, and they can stay here, learn here. There's a temple here, and we have a lecture hall here. So anyways, I just want to thank everyone for coming, and thank the university, and thank everyone here, and the family. Thank you. And lunch is being served, so you better get there fast. So we were smart enough to make sure that we held off lunch after the lecture. Us Indians, we love our food, and so I'm joking. Okay. All right, thank you.